Hello, this is going to be my final submission for the Political Science International Governance course. Um, Hello, Professor Simmons. I'm going to go over the 10 things as you said outline. I hope I don't bust the 10-minute requirement because I do tend to be a little wordy, but I will try and be as concise as possible. So if you see me looking down, I'm referencing some of my notes. And I do apologize. I have two dogs that are pretty active, so if they do come in, I do apologize for that in advance. But I just want to jump right into the 10 things here. So the first thing that I have down here is the concept of realism and how its usefulness, influence, or even really just being introduced to it. I've been introduced to it briefly via a colleague of mine, via Hans Morgenthau, referencing a lot of it as his name coming up a lot, certainly in realism circles. But it's important in a sense of a military sense. I am active duty military, and this is far and away the most widely used theory that I've seen come across. So being able to make sense of that and use that to explain why we're kind of doing what we're doing in a lot of things is certainly a useful thing for me. Something I took from this class that I actually have a name to that concept. The second thing I want to talk about is the concept of pooling. So working together. If 100 people put in 1%, I think it references the World Bank. So if 100 countries put in 1%, or if one country puts in 100%, there's a stark difference between the two, and one of them is certainly better than the other. So this got me into back with realism, and a criticism of that I've seen is the prisoner effect. So, if it may seem beneficial on paper that all the countries working together are going to get a better result if they do work together, it doesn't always work out that way in a sense, but I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, so I apologize. The third point is the role of the International Criminal Court and Trump's America and the American role in general. It seems like started back with President W. Bush, that we really don't really want to be a part of the ICC. But how Trump has exacerbated some of that. Why is that even important? Just being introduced to the ICC and international law, and how the U.S. is so ardently on the opposite side of where the ICC is again a useful concept to have and to be introduced to. Being able to pose it, my position with where that is undoubtedly important. Number four, human rights governance or human rights in general. The role of Saudi Arabia and the role of the IMA, and how those regional organizations really do influence that area. And even a country like Saudi Arabia is going to at least make a half-hearted attempt to address human rights violations, albeit they're doing so while simultaneously committing human rights violations. But again, being aware that they're at least doing one thing while saying something else is undoubtedly going to be an important thing to know or be introduced to. Five is regional organizations in general, being able to distinguish different types of organizations, but regional organizations, why some work and some don't. The trouble with things like the ECOWAS, the West African states, why it's important to have some of those there. I didn't even know there was a West African states regional organization, but knowing that regional organizations can more specifically address those issues in their respective regions, again, is going to be an undoubtedly important thing to do and know about. That it's not just these big heavy hitters worldwide organizations, that these regional organizations can still have a lot of influence on their respective regions. Six is international organizations, IOs, just in general. Again, distinguishing and putting a name to a lot of these things is really useful for categorizing and cataloging a lot of these things that I'm used to hearing, and like, oh, this country's doing this or that organization's doing that, but why they work the way they do. And with international organizations, the idea of certain concepts like norm formation, that things like, again, Saudi Arabia being a part of the human rights, the head of the human rights organization in the United Nations, is an important thing to know. That if we form some of these norms in an international sense with actors like Saudi Arabia, what role does that say to the organization itself. Why do things happen the way they do? Saudi Arabia, it's not like every country in the world voted that Saudi Arabia is going to be the head of the human rights organization of the UN, but there's a lot more nuance to it that had I not taken this course or be aware of how those international organizations work or where to look for those, I probably would have missed that, and that's an important concept to be aware of. 7 is going to be the idea of neutrality, or how specifically how international organizations are designed to be that arbiter between states, between countries, to where nobody's getting either an unfair advantage or an undue. Everyone's getting their say. Everyone's getting a fair shake at things. Again, being aware of those things, to know that that's a big part of what IOs do, is to form that neutral actor in between other states. Again, is a very important thing to know. Number 8, the origins of the role of the EU. So I grew up, I spent some time in Germany and Belgium when my dad was in the army, and I've gone over to Germany a couple times. But being aware, so I hear the EU. I hear the EU's doing this, doing that. Brexit's important, and what it means to be a part of the EU versus not being a part of the EU. But being aware of how it originated, and then how it is now manifested itself in a modern sense. The role of the EU, again, it's important to know things that, if I happen to be stationed overseas, or if I'm in positions in the military where people are discussing the EU, knowing its role, its current position, and what common criticisms of the EU are, and being able to formulate my own opinion, thoughts, being able to rationalize why is the EU doing what it is, and why being cooperative, going back to both pooling and norm formation, that the more they cooperate, the easier it'll be. But again, I think it's prisoner effect or some other reason that they don't want to work together. So that's a whole other geopolitical issue between Europe as a whole and the EU. But again, knowing where that stands now is an important thing, critical, I think, to know. 9, so the recent week 7, the sports organization, I had no idea how big of an influence it was. I think intrinsically or intuitively, I knew that it had some role. It couldn't not have a role. But the degree to which sports, especially international sports, influence both the media and with nationalistic tendencies, it makes perfect sense. And a lot of these other, you see the scandals, the Russian PEDU scandal, you have the bombing scandal, I think it was in Atlanta. You see a lot of these other scandals happening, but but many don't see that as an international sense, why that matters, or what effect that can have on a country, that it's not just kind of head scratching to see, hey, South Korea and North Korea are playing each other in the world in a FIFA tournament, but if those North Korean players don't do well, or if they do something intrinsically bad, how are they going to be treated back at home? And it raises a lot of those questions that I hear about or know about. And last, number 10 is trade governance. So not really the most exciting thing to go over, but obviously everything is related, and nowadays everything is a globalized sense, whether you want to or not. The Monroe Doctrine is a very outdated way to look at this, and being isolationist is just a pipe dream, really. So being aware of trade organizations and governance, and why they matter so much, and arguably they matter more now than they have before, is undoubtedly important as well. So the role of embargoes and tariffs, and how those are all connected. And as we had mentioned in our brief email exchange, as you mentioned, the sugar daddy effect. So if we put a tariff on some country, but they can get it easily from another country, what good does that tariff do? What good does that embargo do? Again, raising these questions, and why is it important, it stuck with me, because again, we hear, oh, we're putting sanctions on this country or this country, but if they can receive some of those elsewhere, how good are those tariffs or sanctions really doing for us? So these are the 10 things that I have, that I put together. I really enjoyed the course. Thank you very much for having it and allowing me to participate. And I hope I explained myself well. So thank you again.